So this is my Calathea Warscewiczii, and gorgeous though it may be, it's the only Calathea in this entire apartment of over 100 plants. Let's talk about it. If you're new here, I'm Fa, and as I mentioned, I'm growing over 100 plants in my 2-bedroom apartment in New York City. If you like plants, gardening, indoors, interiors, life in New York City, you're in the right place. In my opinion, this is probably the most beautiful Calathea out there. Like, look at these markings on this leaf. The Warscewiczii is also known as jungle velvet, and this is one of those plants. I know a lot of people call plants velvet, and sometimes they're just velvet to look at. And then you touch them, expecting it to feel like velvet, or, at least be soft. And it's disappointing, right? Sometimes they feel like cardboard. No, this one feels like true velvet. On the top of the leaves, on the back, even the back, which is like this purpley sort of color, even the back is velvety and soft. Even the stem feels like velvet. These are incredible. The current iteration of this plant is nothing like it used to look like. This is basically its second go round, in that a few months ago I chopped it all the way back to nothing. But instead of starting at the end, why don't we start at the beginning, right, and rewind to when I first got this plant. So not that long into my plant journey, I picked up a Calathea orbifolia. That was like the first Calathea that I fell in love with. I had heard all about the horrors of growing Calatheas and how new beginner plant people should avoid them. So I hadn't really gone down that route. But then I saw these enormous orbifolias on Instagram, and they had leaves the sizes of dinner plates. I mean, they were crazy. At that time, I had very few plants in this apartment anyway. I mean, I wouldn't say very few, but, it was still a manageable number, like 15 or something like that. And the idea of growing a big Calathea orbifolia from nothing really appealed to me. I heard all the horror stories about the humidity and how difficult it was, but I thought, I'll just buy a humidifier. So I got this Calathea orbifolia. I actually got it in the dead of winter. Mistake number 1. Don't do that. Brought it home. I also got it from a store that specializes in succulents and cacti. Mistake number 2. Don't do that. So if I could go back in time, the 2 things I would do differently when purchasing my first Calathea are: buy it at the right time of the year. Calathea do not like the cold. They don't like cold. They are from warm, humid climes. Last summer we went to Ecuador. No, we didn't. What am I talking about? Last summer we went to Colombia, and everywhere we went, in kind of very shaded, not even in the jungle or anything like that, just like walking about in like shaded understory, you would just see these massive clumps of velvety Calathea just, proliferating and living their best life. And that really gave me a sense of what these guys like, because Bogota, where I saw God knows how many of them, is a little bit on the cooler side, but it's still quite humid and it's still warm. You know what I mean? It's not cold. It's quite cloudy. So everywhere I saw these growing, they weren't growing in like proper sun or anything like that. Just like a shaded courtyard somewhere. And they were massive. They don't grow super tall. They just, they have rhizomes. They just keep spreading forever. So you get a sense of how they prefer to grow. Anyway, back to the orbifolia. So I had this Calathea orbifolia here, and it just wasn't doing anything. It was really annoying. I brought it home. It had like 2 leaves. It lost one of the 2. Just looking crispy. I mean, it was January. What do you expect? But, I was sort of faffing about with humidifiers and, worrying about what I was and wasn't doing right, when in truth, all I needed to do was pot that thing up in something that retained a good amount of moisture and give it time to adapt to the environment. I then fell in love with the Calathea Warscewiczii. I saw it I don't remember where I first saw it, but as soon as I saw it, I knew I was going to have it no matter what. Even though the Orbifolia was a disaster, I thought I'm going to have this Warscewiczii. So I decided not to make the same mistake, and I thought I need to buy one from a place that I can ensure that it's the best specimen that I can have. Not that the Orbifolia was a good specimen, it's just, I think it's better to buy tropicals from places that specialize in tropicals, right? There's no point in buying a tropical plant from a cactus shop. Doesn't make sense. They weren't available in stores, like they were basically nowhere to be found. You would have had to go online to buy them. So I looked through online vendors. Because I was a newer beginner plant collector, I wasn't really comfortable buying from individual sellers. I thought it was best to go with an online shop so that if something went wrong in the shipping process, I could get my money back or, send it back, the whole thing. The only place I could find this plant then was what was then Plantarina. Shout out Amanda. I know she's back online. The only place I could find this was Plantarina, so I thought I'll buy it from Plantarina because even though Plantarina plants were expensive compared to some of the others, you knew that you were going to be getting like a high quality plant. You knew it was going to be a good plant. So I bought this one on, it was tiny. I bought the small size with 2 leaves. I bought it on Plantarina and it was a good specimen. When I got it, very, very good looking plant, and it didn't actually give me any trouble. So I set it next to the Orbifolia in the corner. I think I had a Maranta growing in that corner as well. And I had my humidifier going and we got along just fine actually. I grew this plant from 2 leaves to something huge. I mean, it was big. I definitely worried about it a lot. It was potted, the way it was potted up, it dried out a little too quickly for what this plant prefers. And once this dries out, it starts to get these brown tips and it holds its leaves for a long time. So when it gets brown tips, there's nothing, it's just going to be ugly. And then you end up having to cut to improve its appearance. Like, I'm trying to find, there's one here that I cut recently, like this one. Like this one, where you can see that I've cut it just to make the plant look better because I think I went too long without watering it, and I had an ugly crispy bit here, so I cut it. I was growing this plant just fine and it was growing beautifully in that corner, and that was my Calathea corner. Eventually the Orbifolia also picked up and things were good. As time went on, I adapted how I care for the Calatheas to my environment. I figured out what works best for them to keep them looking their best in here, and that was how I moved forward. So I had tried watering them with filtered water. I had tried using aquarium, the stuff that removes the chloramine from water. That didn't work. And in the end, I accepted that other Calathea might be different. But specifically for Calathea Warscewiczii, or before there was a little more tolerant of the type of water, but specifically for Calathea Warscewiczii, it was distilled water or nothing. Anytime I tried anything other than distilled water, it was trash leaves and back to square one. So I decided if I was going to have this Calathea, I accepted that it was going to need distilled water. And so I started buying it distilled water, and I haven't had a problem since. This is the only plant in the house that I use distilled water for, by the way, so it's not really that much of an inconvenience. Everything else gets tap water. This guy gets distilled water and he's happy. So I was growing it happily in a corner over there, giving it distilled water. I initially had a humidifier. In fact, it had its own dedicated humidifier, and then I had another one elsewhere in the room. But the truth is that in this apartment, because it's open plan, and because New York City is just so dry in winter, when you factor in using the heating and using the air conditioning, those little humidifiers simply did nothing. They could not raise the humidity by anything significant. And so in the end, I decided that the plants would have to adapt to life without a humidifier, and I got rid of it. It was just impossible to keep up with it. So I did away with it, and honestly, they were fine. I had to adjust my watering frequency to make up for the lack of humidifiers. So that means watering them more often, but that was okay. So life was fine over in what I was calling Calathea Corner back then, but then I decided to get rid of the Calathea Orbifolia. Why did I do this? Well, Calathea orbifolia, Calatheas in general tend to easily attract pests. I think that this is because they have such high watering needs that when you miss watering, this is not a plant that can be thirsty. When you miss watering, they are immediately weak, which means pests can sense and they're attracted to them. So these tend to get spider mites quite a bit, like all the time. If you are going to have one of these, you have to check it all the time. It basically always has spider mites. I'm interrupting my regularly scheduled programming to show you how I got rid of the spider mites that I found on my Calathea while I was filming this. So I got my handy dandy mixture of neem oil, peroxide, distilled water, because it's a Calathea of course, and peppermint castile soap. I like the Dr. Bronner's brand. And I mix it all up. Really the soap is just to emulsify the mixture. And I start by spraying the entire plant down. I focus very heavily on the backs, which is where spider mites like to hide, as you saw just now. I also get the front. I get the crevices where the stem, the petiole, joins the leaf. I also get the top of the soil. I get the stalks. I basically get any visible part of the plant that I can manage, and I spray the whole thing down thoroughly. I like to do it a couple of times in case I missed any sections. And then once the plant is thoroughly sprayed from top to bottom, I let it sit for a couple of minutes, and then I go in with a microfiber cloth and I wipe. Through the years, I've found that when it comes to removing spider mites manually, so without a miticide, using solutions like neem oil and peroxide, it's not enough to spray the plant. So yes, neem typically often deals with these on contact. However, it is better to physically remove the mite and the eggs. If you physically remove by wiping with a microfiber cloth after spraying, you have a much greater chance of success. The other thing is that by wiping, you will get areas that the spray might have missed when you initially sprayed it down. So for me, wiping the leaves is essential. I focus as much as I can on the backs, which is where most of the action happens. So I wipe the backs down first, wipe that down thoroughly. You can't see it here, but I am changing out the cloth occasionally. Sometimes I just rinse it with hot water and a bit of soap and then come back in with the same cloth. And I like microfiber because it really gets into all the nooks and crannies, gets into every crevice. Of course, this is easy to do for a big leafed plant. If it was thinner leaf, that wouldn't be possible. And there we are, all done, brand spanking new, and back to her spot she goes. But Calathea orbifolia, in addition to having spider mites, was very susceptible to thrips. That drove me absolutely nuts. I mean, I can tolerate spider mites. I'll treat the plant and keep it moving. But thrips, I will not do. So that plant had thrips all the time. I treated it, took care of it, come back again, thrips. Treated it, like I was just done with all the thrips, number one. Number two, as the orbifolia started to grow, it became apparent to me that there just was not going to be space for two Calatheas in that corner, just because of how wide they grow. You know, the footprint of the plant is crazy for an apartment this size. So in the end, I decided to get rid of the orbifolia because there's no way that it was going to be able to grow to its full glory or thrive in this space. Like, it just wasn't possible in this space that I have. So I had to let the orbifolia go and made the decision that this one, the Calathea Warscewiczii, is going to be the one and only Calathea in this house. I still have a Maranta, lemon lime Maranta. I'm actually considering getting rid of that too, and having this be the only member of the Marantaceae family that I keep in the apartment. But I'll never get rid of this. This Calathea is here to stay. Now, over the summer, when we went to Colombia, I had people come and water the plants for me. But of course, when someone is doing you a favor watering plants, you can't really say, please water this one with distilled water only, do these ones. So you just have to, you get what you get and you don't get upset, right? And so she suffered in those 3 weeks. And when we came back, her leaves were looking horrendous. So I knew that I was going to need to do a little bit of rescuing. And the good thing about Calathea is because they grow from those rhizomes. It's easy to, when you chop them down, they just, you know, they pop back up again. So what I did was I took my original plant, I cut it in half. I think I kept about a third of the root ball, just chopped all around it and threw and got rid of 2/3. And there was no point in keeping those. The leaves were completely trashed. So I threw out 2/3 of those leaves and I kept a third. And then I potted it up in fresh potting soil. So aroid mix with a little bit of extra, with some extra cocoa coir for better moisture retention. So not chunky. This doesn't want chunky because the roots are very, very thin. So I potted it up in that. And then what I did was I put it in a self-watering pot this time. So I think this is actually the only plant I have growing in self-watering, but I put it in self-watering because Calatheas need consistent moisture throughout the plant, yes, but also the roots need moisture as much as you can provide. And without a humidifier, the easiest way to do that is to put it in a self-watering pot. And as soon as I did that, it came back. So I cut it down to, I don't know if you can see, I cut it down to the stumps. There's one stump here. It's not very apparent. I'll see if I can show it some other way. I cut it down to the stump and there was nothing left, and I stuck it in its self-watering pot. I think it had one leaf left, and I just watered it with distilled water and put it in the corner, and it did its thing. And so it went from one plant in here to 5. 1, 2, 3. So now there are 5. Now there are 5 small plants in here. It's taking off at a crazy rate. My guess is that by the time it's summer, it will have exploded and I'll need to chop it in half again. I'm going to show you the root system. These are the roots. As you can see, the roots are super fine, but they're very happy growing into the reservoir in this self-watering plant, which is all Calathea want. The roots just want to seek that moisture, and once you have that, they tend to do fine. So the secret to picture perfect Calathea when your environment is less than ideal is a self-watering pot and distilled water. And for this one, the lighting is key. It's very particular about its lighting. This plant doesn't like direct light at all. I mean, I don't mean it doesn't want to be up against the window in direct sunlight. I mean, it doesn't want the sun's rays to touch its leaves. So it sits about 12 feet away from a south window, 12, maybe more, 12 feet away from a south window. And when the sun shines in, all the way back there, if the sun's rays touch these leaves, they actually they curl in on themselves, and it wilts, and it acts like it acts like it's having the hardest time of its life. It's hilarious. A real diva. So it does not want any direct sunlight, which is great. This is a perfect plant if you live in a basement apartment, if you have poor light, if you have north-facing windows, all that kind of stuff. This is a wonderful, wonderful plant for those scenarios. All you have to do is keep it in a self-watering pot and water it with distilled water. Check it regularly for pests, and I'm telling you, it will thrive. It will grow as easily as a snake plant. Like, if you put this with distilled water and self-watering, all you have to do is fill up the reservoir every maybe 2 to 3 weeks, and that's it. Boom, Bob's your uncle. I use on this, because it's in self-watering and because I know I can't flush it routinely with tap water, I try to use a fertilizer that I think is a bit gentler. So I'm fertilizing it with this at the moment, just because I think with it being, I don't know if it being organic makes a difference, but to me, I just think it's easier. So far, I haven't had any difficulty, but I just feel like because there are no preservatives, it might be easier on the leaves of a plant like this whose roots are so sensitive to any kind of salts or anything. So because I can't flush, I use this, and it seems quite happy with it, right? I don't use it every watering either. I use it maybe every other. So once every it basically is getting fertilized like every 3 weeks or something like that. So yeah, that's what I'm using for this one. That's it really. I mean, there's not much else to say for this one except as I was filming this, I decided to check the backs of the leaves, and what do you know it? I can see one or two spider mites just starting to pop up. That's what this plant does. From time to time, it'll just pop up and have spider mites. Now, one of the best things about this is when this plant has spider mites, the leaves do not show damage very quickly at all, which is shocking considering, again, it's a velvet leaf plant. You would expect it to be like really obvious when it has damage, but it's not. It takes a while for it to show. I recently forgot to fill up the reservoir, and pretty sure that's why it now has mites. So I accept that it's going to have spider mites from time to time, not an issue. So yeah, my Calathea Warscewiczii. Till next time, I'll see you.